Charles stunned as Anne finally exposes Camilla's 40-year secret. Shocking audio reveals everything okay. Stay with this for a moment, because this title points to a private family confrontation built around an alleged recording that was said to preserve words connected to one of the most sensitive periods in the royal family's history. According to the storyline surrounding the case, Anne placed the material before Charles and Camilla, claiming that it could reopen questions involving Diana, Charles, Camilla, and palace loyalties that had remained buried for decades. What made this different was not simply the age of the recording. It was the suggestion that someone had known about it all along. The room reportedly fell into a silence that was almost impossible to ignore. Charles was said to have been caught completely off guard as Anne presented the recording and made clear that she believed it deserved to be examined rather than dismissed. Camilla, confronted with the allegation, was described as immediately challenging its authenticity and demanding that the material be subjected to an internal investigation. No shouting was needed to make the moment feel dangerous. The evidence itself was enough to change the atmosphere. The alleged recording was said to contain references to private conversations involving Camilla and to an old arrangement surrounding Charles, Diana, and palace loyalties. But there was another detail that made the situation far more disturbing. Anne reportedly believed the recording was not an isolated piece of material. It was allegedly connected to dated correspondence, private notes, and other documents that had remained outside public view for years. If those materials were genuine and correctly interpreted, the question would no longer be what happened once. It would become a question of who knew, who remained silent, and why. Hi viewers, if this were your family and someone had hidden something this serious from you for 40 years, would you stay silent or demand the truth? That simple choice is at the heart of this story. So if you believe hidden evidence deserves to be examined instead of buried, leave your answer in the comments and stay with this investigation, because what Anne was about to reveal was only the first layer. Anne did not reportedly arrive at that meeting empty-handed. The material before her had been assembled with a purpose. There was an old recording, references to dates, and indications that other records existed somewhere beyond the immediate file. The alleged evidence appeared to form a trail, and Anne seemed determined to follow it to its beginning.
I mean, my daughter has been absolutely wonderful with all these charities and takes a huge interest. So they were all telling me anyway about what a difference she makes. And I know how seriously she takes it all. But she does have a wonderful way with people, you see. That's the special thing, I think. I mean, she's remarkable, really. She's the best listener in the world, you see, so she can get anything out of anybody.
Charles, meanwhile, was no longer dealing with a vague family rumor. He was confronted with something presented as tangible evidence. That distinction mattered. Rumors can be dismissed. Memories can conflict. Stories can change with every retelling. But a recording carries the appearance of permanence. It creates a question that refuses to disappear. If those words were actually spoken, why had nobody brought them forward before? Camilla's position was equally important. Rather than accepting the recording at face value, she reportedly questioned its authenticity and the circumstances in which it had been preserved. That challenge created a second battle. Before anyone could decide what the recording meant, they would have to establish whether it was genuine, where it came from, and whether the voices and statements had been preserved without alteration. That was the first crack in the apparent certainty of the room. The recording alone could not answer everything, and Anne appeared to know that. The most unsettling part of the alleged discovery was not even the voice captured on the material, it was the trail behind it. The trail reportedly pointed backward through decades of correspondence and private notes, toward a period when Diana, Charles, and Camilla occupied an intensely complicated place within the royal story. The material was said to contain references that, if authentic, could suggest that certain people were aware of sensitive information long before it resurfaced. That possibility changed the emotional temperature of the meeting. A secret kept for a few weeks is one thing. A secret allegedly protected for years is another. But a secret connected to records preserved across generations raises an entirely different question. Who was protecting it? Anne reportedly wanted that question answered. The alleged recording was therefore treated not as the final revelation, but as a doorway. Behind it appeared to be another collection of evidence, and behind that evidence, another unanswered question. The deeper the trail went, the less likely it seemed that everything could be explained as a simple misunderstanding. This was also why the date mattered. The recording was allegedly connected to events that reached back almost 40 years. That meant the people involved in the original circumstances had lived through decades of silence, while the royal institution itself had changed around them. Public attention had shifted. Personal relationships had changed. Generations had grown up with only fragments of the story. Yet according to the allegations surrounding this case, something remained: a record, a memory, a voice, and possibly an archive.
I remember coming to see our Maggie's just after the king being diagnosed. Nobody could say anything at the time. That was quite difficult. I almost said something, but I felt that it wasn't the time to say. Looked at everybody who was suffering and all the relations, and I think it made me realise even more how important these places were.
For Charles, the most unsettling realization would have been that the material was not being presented as an old family anecdote. It was being presented as evidence that might force a fresh examination of what people believed they already understood. For Anne, the issue appeared to be even more direct. If the evidence could be authenticated, it needed to be heard. If it could not, it needed to be tested. Either way, ignoring it would leave the central question untouched. That question was already becoming impossible to escape. Why had this material survived for so long? The room had barely begun to absorb that question when another detail reportedly emerged. The alleged recording was not the oldest item connected to the matter. Somewhere in the hidden trail were documents carrying dates and private references that appeared to predate the moment when the recording became important. That meant the recording might not have been the beginning at all. It might have been the evidence that finally led investigators towards something much older. And that changed everything, because if the archive existed, the next step would not be listening, it would be tracing. Every date would matter, every name would matter, every unexplained gap would matter, and every person who had once handled those records could suddenly become part of the story. Anne was therefore left facing a decision that could not be taken lightly. Bringing the alleged evidence forward had already placed Charles and Camilla in an uncomfortable confrontation. Following the evidence further could draw attention to people who had remained invisible for decades. The stakes were no longer limited to one recording. They were beginning to surround an entire chain of custody. Who preserved the material? Who had access to it? Who knew it existed? And why had it remained hidden until now? Those questions hung over the meeting as the recording waited to be examined more closely. But there was one detail that made the entire situation even harder to dismiss. The person who allegedly preserved the evidence was not believed to have acted randomly. Someone had apparently kept track of it, someone had remembered where it was, and someone may have believed that, one day, the truth would have to surface. Charles had entered the room expecting a difficult conversation. He was now facing something far more unsettling. A recording that allegedly reached back 4 decades, an archive that appeared to stretch beyond it, and a question that could not be answered by simply denying the story. Who had known the secret first? If that question is already making it impossible to look away, then staying for the next part matters, because the trail was about to leave that room and lead toward the first piece of evidence that could explain where the recording came from, and what had been hidden behind it for all those years. The first name on the document was not Charles, it was the name of the doctor. That was the detail that changed Anne's next move. The alleged archive did not simply point toward an old royal conversation. It pointed toward a person who had been close to the events at the center of the controversy, and who, decades later, was still alive. According to the accounts surrounding the case, the doctor's name appeared beside a date connected to the period when Diana's private life had become increasingly complicated. The reference was brief, almost ordinary, but beside it was a notation that suggested the doctor had been directly involved in an episode that someone had worked hard to keep out of public discussion. Anne reportedly treated the notation as a lead, not a conclusion. She needed to know whether the doctor remembered the circumstances and whether the surviving records matched the material that had reached her. One inconsistency could weaken the entire claim. One confirmation could take the investigation somewhere much more serious. The search eventually led to the doctor's present location. He was elderly and living away from the public attention that had surrounded the royal household for much of his professional life. There was nothing about his current existence that suggested he was waiting for a revelation. Yet when the old material was brought before him, the reaction was reportedly immediate. He recognized the date. He also recognized the circumstances. But recognition did not produce relief. It produced hesitation. The doctor reportedly became guarded when the conversation turned toward Diana and the people who had been around her at the time. He was said to have remembered a period of intense pressure, a private medical episode, and a confrontation that had never entered the public record in the form now being alleged. That distinction mattered. A memory from 40 years ago could be incomplete. A document could be misfiled. A recording could be misunderstood. But when separate pieces appeared to point toward the same period, the possibility of coincidence became harder to accept. The doctor allegedly confirmed only the narrowest part of the account at first. Diana had been brought for medical attention during a period of severe physical and emotional strain. Her condition had required attention. There had also been another familiar figure connected to Charles present at the same medical facility. That figure was Camilla. The mention of her name reportedly changed the conversation. The doctor became even more cautious. He did not openly accuse anyone. He did not provide the dramatic confession that investigators might have wanted. Instead, according to the account, he indicated that there were details he had been instructed not to discuss. That was more revealing than a simple denial. If there was nothing sensitive about the episode, why had the doctor remained so guarded after 4 decades? That question became central to the next stage of the investigation. The alleged archive contained another reference. It suggested that someone connected to the household had been aware of the doctor's knowledge and had made arrangements to prevent the matter from spreading. The identity of that person remained unclear, but the implication was serious. The investigation was no longer dealing with one reluctant witness. It was beginning to trace a pattern of silence. And then another name appeared. Not a senior royal, not a famous advisor, a former member of the household staff. The person had spent years close enough to observe private routines and conversations that ordinary outsiders would never have seen. According to the account, this individual had carried knowledge of the old controversy for decades, but had remained silent because speaking could have destroyed a career, a reputation, or both. The former staff member reportedly did not come forward immediately. The first contact was cautious. There were no dramatic announcements and no public accusation. The person allegedly wanted to know whether Anne was genuinely interested in the evidence or simply looking for a story that would confirm an existing suspicion. That hesitation made sense. The case involved people whose names carried enormous public weight. Any witness stepping forward would have to accept that the information could attract intense scrutiny. A statement made privately could become a headline within hours. But the former staff member eventually agreed to speak. The account says the meeting took place away from public attention. There, the witness allegedly described years of pressure surrounding sensitive information and explained that certain matters were treated as subjects that nobody within the household was expected to discuss. The witness also reportedly remembered the old medical episode. There was an important difference, however. Unlike the doctor, the former staff member claimed to have been close enough to understand what happened immediately afterward. That was the point where the investigation acquired a human voice. The witness allegedly described an atmosphere of fear after the incident and claimed that people who had knowledge of it were encouraged to remain silent. The account further alleges that pressure was applied through professional relationships and personal vulnerability, rather than through any formal legal process. Those claims remained allegations, but they provided a possible explanation for something that had troubled Anne from the beginning. Why had no clear account survived publicly? The witness allegedly had an answer. People were afraid of what would happen if they spoke. That answer also created another problem. If the witness was telling the truth, there should have been something tangible left behind. Memories alone would not be enough. Anne needed documentation that could be checked against dates, names, and other records. The former staff member reportedly knew exactly where to look. A copy of an old document had survived. It was not supposed to be in circulation. It had been kept privately for years, separated from the main palace records. According to the account, the document concerned Diana and the medical episode that had become the focus of the investigation. Its existence was significant because it could potentially connect the witness's memory to the older material already under examination. But there was an even more troubling detail. The document was not the only thing that had survived. The witness allegedly possessed private notes describing what happened after the original incident and identifying people who had been aware of it. At that moment, the investigation changed direction again. Anne was no longer asking whether an old story had been exaggerated over time. She was trying to establish whether separate records had preserved the same sequence of events. The witness reportedly warned that the material could cause serious consequences if exposed without verification. That warning was not treated as a reason to stop. It became a reason to move more carefully. Every page had to be examined, every date had to be compared, every name had to be checked, and every unexplained gap had to be treated as a possible clue. The most important question now concerned the missing link between the surviving document and the recording that had stunned the family meeting. How had the two pieces become connected? The answer was reportedly buried inside the witness's account. The former staff member claimed that someone had preserved a copy of the original material because they believed the official record would eventually disappear. That allegation, if true, meant the archive had not survived by accident. Someone had deliberately protected it. That single possibility raised the stakes again. If a person had intentionally preserved evidence for decades, then somebody else might have known that the evidence existed. And if someone knew, why had the truth remained buried? The witness reportedly had one final piece of information that could begin answering that question. There was another document. It carried a date. It contained a private reference. And it appeared to identify the person who had first taken responsibility for keeping the material out of sight. The witness reportedly placed the sealed folder on the table, but refused to open it immediately. There was a reason for that hesitation. The document inside did not merely contain information about Diana. It allegedly contained a reference to an internal decision made after the original incident, a decision that could explain why certain records were separated from ordinary files. Anne understood that this was the point where the investigation could either collapse under scrutiny or become impossible to ignore. She asked for the folder to be opened. The witness finally agreed, but warned that the first page would raise a question neither of them could avoid again. The name had not yet been revealed. The next discovery would expose the hidden link between the old medical record, the secret archive, and the recording that had brought Anne into direct conflict with Camilla. If you believe evidence should never be buried simply because powerful people are involved, make your voice count with a like, share this story, and subscribe now, because the next part reveals the document that could turn this from an old rumor into a far more dangerous question. The folder opened, and the first line changed the investigation. It did not name Camilla. It did not name Charles. It named an internal palace office and carried a date that placed the document much closer to the original events than anyone had expected. The note appeared to record a decision about sensitive material and who was permitted to see it. If the document was genuine, the secret had not simply been forgotten, it had been managed. That distinction mattered. The former staff member reportedly watched Anne read the page without saying a word. The document contained no sensational confession. Its significance came from what it implied. Certain records had been separated from ordinary files, and access had apparently been restricted. The reason was not explained clearly. Instead, the note referred to the need for discretion and warned that the material could cause unnecessary complications if it circulated beyond a limited group. That language became the first serious indication that the silence surrounding the old affair may have been organized rather than accidental. The investigation now had a new target, not a person, a system. The witness reportedly produced another set of papers that had been kept apart from the first folder. These were private notes, written at different times, with names and dates that appeared to overlap with the period under investigation. Some entries were incomplete, others were difficult to read. But one recurring detail stood out. The same event kept appearing, the same medical episode, the same people, and the same instruction to remain silent. Anne reportedly compared the dates one by one. The pattern did not prove every allegation, but it gave the investigation something it had not possessed before, a timeline that could be tested. The witness then revealed why the papers had been kept. Years earlier, according to the account, the material had been copied before sensitive records were moved or removed from ordinary access. The person who made the copies apparently believed that the original documents might one day become unavailable. Rather than destroying the evidence, the copies were hidden. That decision created a dangerous contradiction. If the records were considered unimportant, why preserve them? If they were harmless, why restrict access? And if nobody feared the information, why did the witness remember being warned about it decades later? The questions were becoming harder to separate. Then came the first major break in the archive. One page contained a handwritten reference to an audio recording. The recording had not been created recently. The notes suggested that a conversation had been preserved because its contents could become important if the old matter was ever challenged. That was the first direct bridge between the archive and the recording Anne had brought into the family confrontation. The significance was immediate. The audio was no longer an isolated object with an uncertain history. There was now an alleged paper trail pointing toward its existence. But the note did not identify the voice. It did something more unsettling. It indicated that someone expected the conversation to matter in the future. That meant the person who preserved it had understood its potential value. The witness reportedly admitted that this was the part of the story they had feared discussing most. The recording had become a kind of insurance against forgetting. If the truth was ever disputed, the voice could be heard again. But there was a problem. The person who had preserved the recording was no longer easily reachable. According to the account, the archive had passed through several hands over the years. Each transfer created another gap. Each gap created another opportunity for the evidence to disappear. That was why the former staff member had kept copies. The witness allegedly believed that once the material was gone, the original story could never be reconstructed. The archive, therefore, became more than a collection of old papers. It became a chain of memory, and every link mattered. Anne reportedly asked the witness to identify the earliest person connected to the material. The answer did not come immediately. The witness studied the documents again before pointing to a name that had not appeared in the earlier discussion. It was the name of a person who had worked close enough to palace affairs to know how sensitive records were handled. That discovery changed the investigation's direction. Until then, the evidence appeared to concern what happened during one disputed period. Now it was beginning to concern what happened afterward. Who received the information? Who ordered it contained? Who had access to the copies? And who decided that Charles should not see them? That last question carried particular weight. If the alleged archive had existed for decades, and if its contents were connected to Charles's own family history, then the possibility that he had never been shown the material became one of the most disturbing aspects of the story. The witness reportedly did not claim to know every answer. Instead, another document was produced. This one was shorter. It contained a handwritten instruction referring to a private file and warned that it was not to be included with ordinary family records. The language was cautious, but the intention appeared clear. Keep it separate, keep it controlled, do not allow it to circulate. The instruction could not by itself prove why the restriction existed. It could have referred to privacy, medical confidentiality, or another sensitive concern. That ambiguity mattered. A responsible investigation could not simply turn an unexplained note into proof of wrongdoing. Anne therefore reportedly focused on verification. The handwriting had to be examined. The date had to be checked. The paper itself had to be compared with other documents from the same period. Most importantly, the reference to the recording had to be matched against the audio already in her possession. That was the moment the investigation became dangerous in a different way. There was now a possibility of independent confirmation. If the dates matched, the archive strengthened the recording's provenance. If the names matched, the chain became stronger, and if the voice contained information corresponding to the private notes, the old allegations would become much harder to dismiss as a story created years later. But before that comparison could happen, the witness revealed one final detail. The person who had originally preserved the material had not kept everything. One part of the archive was missing, and according to the witness, that missing section contained the most sensitive reference of all. The disappearance was not random. Someone had searched for it. Someone knew exactly what they were looking for. That meant the archive had not merely been hidden, it may also have been hunted. For the first time, Anne had reason to believe that whoever wanted the old material buried could still have a reason to prevent its return. The former staff member reportedly became visibly anxious when discussing the missing section. The fear was no longer about an old memory. It concerned the possibility that the people connected to the archive might still have influence over what survived. That possibility forced Anne to change her approach. The documents could not simply be stored in one place. The evidence needed independent copies. The audio needed examination. The handwriting needed authentication. And the people who knew about the archive needed protection from pressure. Only then could the next stage begin. The recording itself had to be tested against the paper trail. But before Anne could complete that comparison, another discovery reportedly appeared inside the archive. It was a short handwritten note carrying a date from the same period. The wording was simple. It referred to a conversation that should never be repeated, and beside it was a name. That name was the first indication that someone inside the palace may have known about the material decades before Charles ever heard it. The archive had finally produced the question everyone had been avoiding. Who knew, and why did they keep Charles in the dark? The answer could not be guessed from the handwriting alone. It had to be connected to the people, dates, and decisions surrounding the file. That was why the next step became critical. The archive could show that information had been preserved, but it could not automatically establish that every interpretation was correct. Anne reportedly understood that distinction. She did not need a dramatic accusation. She needed a chain that could withstand scrutiny. The team examining the material began carefully comparing the dates against public records and private references. One date appeared. It sat close to the point when the recording was created. Another reference appeared beside it, indicating that the conversation had been considered sensitive enough to preserve separately. Then the comparison produced something unexpected. A phrase in the handwritten note appeared to correspond with a phrase remembered from the recording. It was not enough to settle the case. But it was enough to justify listening, this time with the archive open beside the audio. And that was when the investigation reached its most dangerous stage. If you believe powerful institutions should not get to decide which uncomfortable evidence disappears, do not scroll away now. Like, share, and subscribe, because the next part brings the recording itself into focus, and what it allegedly reveals is far more damaging than the existence of the archive. The room went quiet when the recording finally began. For several seconds, there was only faint background noise. Then a voice emerged. The words were difficult to hear at first, but the tone was unmistakably tense. This was the moment the entire investigation had been building toward, because the alleged audio was no longer sitting inside a folder. It was being tested against the archive that had preserved references to it for decades. The first comparison produced an unsettling result. A phrase heard in the recording appeared to resemble wording found in one of the handwritten notes. It was not proof by itself, and the investigators knew that. Similar language could occur by coincidence, but the correspondence was close enough to demand a deeper examination. The audio was therefore reviewed again. This time, attention shifted away from the emotional tone and toward details. Dates were isolated, names were noted, references to the old dispute were separated from unrelated conversation. Each statement was compared with the surviving documents. The purpose was simple. Could the recording be connected to the archive without relying on assumption? According to the accounts surrounding the case, the answer began to look increasingly significant. The recording appeared to contain references to the same period described in the private notes. It also allegedly contained discussion of information that had been kept away from ordinary records. The more the material was compared, the more the separate pieces seemed to point toward the same unresolved episode. But the most important moment had not arrived. A later section of the audio allegedly contained a reference to the witnesses. That changed the investigation immediately. Until then, the archive suggested that people had known about the old controversy. The recording now appeared to suggest that at least some individuals understood the risk of those witnesses speaking publicly. That distinction raised the stakes. Knowing about an event is one thing. Knowing that witnesses exist is another. Knowing that those witnesses could contradict an official version is something else entirely. The investigators reportedly isolated that portion of the recording and examined it repeatedly. The speaker allegedly referred to the need for silence and warned against discussing the old incident outside a trusted circle. The wording mattered because it appeared to connect the recording to the same pattern already visible in the archive. Private information, restricted access, witnesses, silence, and a fear that the past could return. At this point, the story moved directly toward Camilla. The voice was allegedly identified as hers, although any real authentication would require proper forensic testing rather than assumption. That caveat did not make the recording less important. It made verification more important. Camilla's reported response was immediate. She challenged the authenticity of the material and questioned how it had been obtained. She reportedly demanded that the recording be examined before anyone treated its contents as reliable. That response created an unexpected complication for Anne. The evidence could not simply be played and declared genuine. The source had to be established. The investigators therefore examined the recording's history. Where had it been stored? Who had handled it? Had the file been altered? Did its format match the period in which it was allegedly created? Could the voice be independently identified? Every answer mattered. One weak link could damage the entire case. One strong link could make the recording extremely difficult to ignore. The archive provided another clue. The handwritten note referring to the recording appeared to have been created before the material became publicly relevant. If that dating could be authenticated, it would make the claim that the recording had been fabricated recently considerably harder to sustain. Still, the investigation could not leap from suspicion to certainty. The most explosive part of the audio had to be examined in context. The speaker allegedly referred to the old confrontation involving Diana and Camilla. The account claims that the conversation included language suggesting that the speaker knew witnesses had been pressured to remain silent. It appeared to address the central question directly: what happened after the original incident? According to the allegations, the answer involved pressure on people who could have spoken about what they had witnessed. The audio allegedly contained a warning that certain matters were not to be discussed. It allegedly referred to the danger of speaking, and it allegedly suggested that the people who possessed knowledge of the past understood the consequences of breaking their silence. Those claims were serious enough that Anne reportedly refused to rely on the recording alone. She returned to the witness. The former staff member was asked whether the voice and statements matched what had been experienced years earlier. The witness allegedly recognized the circumstances and confirmed that the language surrounding silence was consistent with what had been demanded at the time. That confirmation strengthened the chain. It also exposed a vulnerability. If Camilla learned that the witness had cooperated, the person could become a target of pressure. The account claims that concern soon became reality. A contact was allegedly made. The witness reportedly received a call connected to the old matter. The conversation was approached carefully because the witness understood that any direct confrontation could become important evidence. The alleged caller demanded to know why the witness had avoided contact and questioned why Anne was investigating the old events. The witness reportedly remained cautious and did not reveal everything that had already been shared. Instead, the conversation continued. Then came the statement that investigators had been waiting for. The speaker allegedly referred directly to the old incident and warned the witness not to discuss it. That alone would have been significant. But the account claims the conversation went further. The speaker allegedly acknowledged knowledge of the confrontation involving Diana and Camilla and referred to the existence of material connected to it. The recording of this newer conversation therefore became a second layer of evidence. The original audio was allegedly connected to the old period. The new recording allegedly connected the present investigation to someone who still knew about the past. Suddenly, the archive was no longer merely historical. It was active. The alleged threat also changed the emotional balance of the case. Anne had been investigating something buried in the past. Now, according to the account, someone appeared to be reacting to the investigation in the present. That suggested the old secret still mattered to somebody. The question became why? Why would anyone care so deeply about records created decades earlier? Why would a witness still be pressured after so much time had passed? And why would an archive containing old material appear to trigger such urgency? The answer, if the allegations were correct, was tied to the recording. It contained something that could not be easily explained away by memory alone. The alleged voice did not merely discuss what happened. It appeared to discuss who knew. That was the point where Charles became central again. The material was no longer being presented to him as a distant royal controversy. It was allegedly connected to his own family history and to decisions that may have been made without his knowledge. The possibility was deeply uncomfortable. If the evidence was authentic, then Charles would have to consider whether information about Diana, Camilla, and the old palace dispute had been deliberately kept beyond his reach. And if the evidence was not authentic, then the entire chain would have to be dismantled. There was no comfortable middle ground. Anne reportedly understood that. She did not need Charles to accept the allegations immediately. She needed him to understand that the evidence deserved examination. The next step was therefore unavoidable. The recordings, the documents, and the witness testimony had to be placed together. Only then could the central question be tested. Was this an old secret that had resurfaced by chance? Or had someone been protecting it for decades? That question had already transformed the atmosphere around the investigation. But the most damaging discovery was still ahead. The archive allegedly contained evidence suggesting that knowledge of the material reached farther inside the palace than anyone had first believed. And that meant Camilla might not have been the only person who knew. That was the point at which the story stopped being about one recording. It became a question about an entire network of silence. The evidence now appeared to form three connected layers. The first was the old documentation. The second was the preserved recording. The third was the alleged present-day conversation involving a witness. Together, they created a chain that demanded verification. Anne reportedly prepared the material for the next confrontation. The audio was ready. The documents were ready. The witness was prepared to confirm what could be confirmed. But one name inside the archive remained unexplained. It belonged to someone who had allegedly known about the material long before Anne ever found it. The significance of that discovery was serious. A secret can survive because nobody remembers it. It can survive because people disagree about what happened. But when records, voices, and witness accounts appear to converge around the hidden episode, the burden changes. The question is no longer whether the story sounds believable. The question becomes whether the surviving evidence can withstand scrutiny. That is why the next name mattered. It could reveal whether the silence surrounding the material was caution or something far more deliberate. Until that name was understood, the investigation remained incomplete now. That name was about to change the entire meaning of the secret. And if you believe Charles had a right to know what was allegedly hidden from him, do not let this story disappear into silence. Like it, share it, and subscribe, because the next chapter exposes who may have known for decades and what happened when the truth finally reached the people at the center of it. The name inside the archive was the detail nobody could explain away. It belonged to a person who, according to the accounts surrounding the case, had known about the material long before Anne ever encountered it. That discovery shifted the focus one final time. The question was no longer whether an old recording existed. It was whether people connected to the palace had known about the evidence for decades and deliberately kept it away from Charles. Anne reportedly brought the complete evidence package back before Charles and the other senior figures involved in the private discussion. This time, the material was not presented as one mysterious recording. It was presented as a chain. There were the old documents, there were the private notes, there was the archive reference to the recording, there was the newer conversation involving the witness, and there was the unresolved question of who had known about all of it. The distinction was crucial. None of the individual pieces could automatically prove every allegation. Documents can be misunderstood. Memories can change. Recordings require authentication. But taken together, the material reportedly created enough questions to demand review. Charles was therefore faced with something different from the rumors that had circulated around the royal family for years. He was facing evidence that was being presented for verification. Anne reportedly refused to turn the meeting into a spectacle. Her position was simple. If the recording was false, prove it false. If the documents were altered, establish how. If the witness had misunderstood events, test the testimony. But if the material survived those examinations, then the family could no longer pretend that the questions did not exist. That approach placed Camilla in an increasingly difficult position. She had already challenged the recording's authenticity. Now the issue was larger. The archive appeared to contain references that predated the controversy. Any investigation would have to examine the recording and its history. Camilla reportedly insisted that the evidence be independently examined. That demand, however, could cut both ways. An authentic examination might weaken the allegations. It might also strengthen them. The family meeting therefore moved toward the only conclusion that could settle the dispute responsibly. Verification. The recordings would have to be examined. The documents would have to be authenticated. The dates would have to be checked. The witnesses would have to be interviewed separately, and the chain connecting the archive to the alleged audio would have to be reconstructed. This was the point where the story became bigger than Anne's original discovery. The alleged secret was no longer just about Diana, Charles, and Camilla. It was about institutional memory and what happens when generations inherit sensitive information. It was also about whether loyalty can become silence when nobody asks the uncomfortable question. The strongest emotional impact fell on Charles. For years, public discussion of his relationship with Diana and Camilla had been shaped by competing accounts. People had argued over motives, timelines, loyalties, and private conversations. Now, according to the account, Charles was being confronted with material that allegedly suggested some information had existed outside the version he understood. That did not automatically establish guilt. It did not automatically establish a conspiracy, but it created a painful possibility. What if the person at the center of the story had been among the last people to know? That possibility reportedly left Charles stunned. The final evidence review produced another important complication. The archive could show that certain material had been preserved, but preservation alone could not establish who ordered its concealment. The investigators therefore focused on the missing link between knowledge and decision. Who made the choice? Who had authority? Who benefited from silence? And who had reason to fear disclosure? Those questions moved the investigation away from gossip and toward accountability. The witness was reportedly asked again whether the pressure described decades earlier had come from one individual or whether it reflected a wider culture of obedience. The answer suggested that fear had not always needed to be expressed as an explicit threat. Sometimes a person simply understood what would happen if they stepped outside the expected line. Power does not always need to shout. Sometimes silence is created because everyone already knows the cost of speaking. For Anne, that was precisely why the evidence needed to be preserved correctly. The goal was no longer to produce the most dramatic accusation. It was to establish what could actually be supported. The recordings were treated as evidence requiring authentication. The documents were treated as historical material requiring verification rather than unquestionable truth. The witness statements were treated as testimony requiring comparison rather than instant confirmation. That distinction protected the investigation from becoming another rumor cycle. It also made the central question harder to escape. If the evidence survived independent examination, what would the palace do with it? Would the institution confront the past openly? Would the records be released? Would the people connected to the material be questioned? Or would the story once again disappear into private files? According to the storyline, Anne was determined that the final option would not happen quietly. She had reportedly pushed the material into the open because the alleged secret had already survived too long. The emotional center returned to Diana. Whatever the final interpretation of the evidence, the controversy had reopened questions about the pressure surrounding her life, the relationships that surrounded her marriage, and the private conflicts that became public history. That was why the archive mattered. It represented memories that had survived after their creators had moved on. And it raised a question that remains powerful even when every allegation is subjected to scrutiny. How much of history is shaped by what is remembered, and how much is shaped by what powerful people decide not to discuss? The alleged recording had begun as a shocking object placed before Charles. By the end of the investigation, it had become something more complicated. It was a test of evidence, a test of institutional transparency, and a test of whether old controversies can be examined without allowing loyalty to replace truth. Camilla's challenge to the recording's authenticity remained important. If the audio could not be verified, its most explosive claims could not responsibly be treated as established fact. But if forensic examination, documentary evidence, and independent testimony supported its authenticity, then the story would demand a very different level of attention. That is where the final consequence lies, not in a dramatic verdict delivered overnight, not in a convenient ending, but in the demand for evidence to be tested in full. The alleged secret had survived because uncertainty protected it. One person could say they remembered differently. Another could say the document meant something else. Someone else could question the recording. And each disagreement could keep the truth out of reach. The only way forward was verification. That was the principle Anne reportedly brought into the confrontation. Listen to the recording. Examine the documents. Question the witnesses. Follow the dates. Then decide what the evidence actually supports. For Charles, that process could be deeply uncomfortable. For Camilla, it could be equally consequential. And for the institution itself, the issue reached beyond personalities. A royal family can survive controversy. It can survive rumors. What becomes dangerous is the perception that truth is treated differently depending on who possesses it. That is why the alleged 40-year secret continues to attract attention. The recording may or may not prove what its supporters claim. The archive may contain answers, or it may contain fragments that require a completely different interpretation. But the existence of unanswered questions is enough to explain why this story refuses to disappear. That may be the real lesson. A secret does not become truth simply because it is hidden. A rumor does not become fact simply because it is repeated. And an allegation does not become meaningless simply because powerful people would prefer not to discuss it. Evidence has to be tested, witnesses have to be heard, records have to be examined, and when the evidence points somewhere uncomfortable, the answer should not be silence, it should be scrutiny. If you believe that principle matters, do not let this story end here. Like this video to show that uncomfortable questions deserve to be examined, share it so the discussion cannot be quietly buried, and subscribe to this channel with notifications turned on. The next story goes even deeper into the royal controversies that people thought had finally disappeared, and what comes next may be even harder to explain.